Service Lab is a community of service design doers and the service design curious. We meet up every few months to share our learnings with each other.
So the first speaker, as I was saying, tonight is Tracy. Tracy is a Guatemalan service designer at Snook, and she strives to create positive impact in society, and she's an altruist with an entrepreneurial spirit. Her interest in social innovation has allowed her to volunteer and work with children and young people, as well as rural indigenous women on various topics. And tonight she's going to share, she's going to tell us about the project in the Immediate Society Network on building resilience in marginalized communities. Over to you, Tracy. You should be able to share your screen.
So yeah, I'm here today to talk to you about the work that I've been doing at RESI. But before I begin, I want to introduce myself. I'm Tracy Gordon. I'm a service designer at Snook. And as Otla mentioned, I'm originally from Guatemala City. And before moving to the UK, I worked back home in different organizations, working on community development, mainly with women and children. And today I'm here to talk to you about a project that is really close to my heart. And I want to talk to you about the Immediate Solidarity Network, RESI, which is a grassroots relief group set up amidst COVID-19 to support marginalized communities in Guatemala City. And I'll share the work that we've done, our challenges, lessons learned, and the impact that we've had. So, let me take you on a journey of more than 5,000 miles from London to my home country, Guatemala, so I can give you a little bit of background. Welcome to the land of volcanoes and eternal spring. Guatemala has a population of almost 18 million people and a metropolitan area of almost 3.5 million people. This is what my country looks like, and it's really breathtaking. It relies heavily on the service industry, manufacturing, and agricultural production. However, 70% of the economically active population, which means 6 million people, rely on the informal economy, which means that they work outside of the legal framework and lack social security or any protection. And as you can see, those who live in extreme poverty live on less than £1.50 a day, which means not eating much. When the pandemic started, the government implemented really strict containment measures because we don't have the infrastructure or the capacity for this, and our healthcare system is already collapsed. So shortly after lockdown was imposed, you could see families going out to the streets, waving flags as a cry out for help. They were starving. And in Guatemala City, we have a main landfill where all of the rubbish goes. And there's a community of people that live in the surrounding areas of the dump and scavenge this place to find items to resell as a way of living. But because of the lockdown, they lost their livelihood and they basically don't have a safety net or anyone to respond for them. So our challenge, how might we support marginalized communities that lost their livelihood due to the pandemic? And I'm going to share with you some of the learnings that we've had during this whole process. So thorough planning is key. Even though RESI has had an immediate response, our strategy and our process was designed and planned in 30 days, a month, which has allowed us to reach the goals and impact that we've had. The Immediate Solidarity Network is made of more than 100 young professional volunteers that are working to provide humanitarian aid and to help families in need in Guatemala City since March 2020 until the end of the year. Volunteers and coordinators are people who share the same views and are people who have a sensitivity and of the reality in Guatemala and want to reduce the food gap insecurity and work in noble causes. In my case, my friend Oni, who's also joining us today, invited me to join, and I just couldn't say no. This is what RESI looks like our teams were divided into 8 different working groups to make sure that we support the families. This is what we've been doing in a nutshell. This is the roadmap and all the efforts that we've been doing to benefit families. So from prioritizing the families that we would work with, there's a heavy work on monitoring and evaluating, and a lot of work on fundraising and sending the money to Guatemala. And then we purchase from providers and we make sure that we deliver to the families. But we also designed a biosafety protocol to make sure that everyone, volunteers as well as the families that we work with, are kept safe. We're working in alliance with 13 organizations, so 3 strategic organizations and 10 community-based organizations that have been working in these neighborhoods for years, and they know the needs of these families. And I want to highlight that we could not have entered these communities if it not were for these organizations, because we need the trust, and they have it. They've been working for years. And these organizations were already a network, but RESI has been working with them to strengthen their capabilities and their ability to work together. So our partner organizations have helped us prioritize 500 families that were living in informal settlements, and out of 15,000 that the network could reach, but we selected the 500 families that would be most vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19. Our evaluation process surfaced the reality of these families, which is many of them lack basic utilities like water, and it also makes them more vulnerable. Like, how could they wash their hands if they don't have any access to it? We also found that families who are at risk will probably, at risk of malnutrition, will probably carry on being at risk of malnutrition at the end of our support. And our second learning is that anyone can make a difference, and every bit counts. As I mentioned before, we are a group of young professionals, so we have economists, architects in different fields. And in this case, we work with doctors and health specialists to set the criteria of food for the families. And even though the support that we're giving to the families is materialized in food baskets, it goes beyond that, because families don't have to worry about food needs, or they can make sure that during this 7 months that we've been supporting them, they can secure their living spaces, or because they still have to pay rent, they still have to pay for electricity and other utilities, or they can even worry about getting other types of food to complement the baskets, like, for example, milk and eggs. But what we're trying to do is to avoid that they go out and risk getting infected. And I highlighted the three foods at the top because those are the most valued items by the families. We've been working on a urban garden scheme with volunteers who have offered a space in their gardens, allotments, or balconies to grow food. And we also have some production centers, but I've asked one of our coordinators in Guatemala to share a bit of the work that they've been doing back home.
We have 2 sites that we are working on. We've been growing over 10 varieties of vegetables, as you can see on the background, some beets, some cabbage, spinach. Also, we've been growing native plants. These plants are consumed locally. We've been working since June, a hectare of land, with the help of over 30 volunteers that come weekly. Right now you can see some of them doing some agriculture activities like cleaning, working on the soil. And it's been a space for them to reconnect with land and how food grows. Last Thursday, we just had our harvest, and we are so excited to see in the next few months how much more we can complement the nutrition and the health of the families with these vegetables.
So when we're talking about resilience, is that, yes, we're providing food to safeguard health and ensure food security for the families. But beyond that, we're also focusing on the construction of solidarity networks And we're not only growing produce, we're sending families instructions to how to keep safe from COVID, prevention and safety, and even giving them recipes on ways how to make their food the most out of their food baskets. Another one of our learnings is that solidarity has no currency or time zone. For us, it has been overwhelming to see how many people have supported RESI in different ways with skills, time, money, or resources or work. And with our different teams in different parts of the world, we've been meeting and trying to show ways how to communicate this. And when I joined RESI, my immediate reaction was, we need to communicate this. So I created a very rough draft of a wireframe to build a website and led the crowdfunding strategies to see if we could help or reach out to our friends or our immediate network to see how they could support. And Ale, who's also joining me here today, we've been finding ways to design the website and to work on the storytelling and the content and how to make sure that we communicate this effectively. Our initial goal was to raise enough money to help feed 55 families for a month, but through our strategy, we've raised over £4,000 to help more than 100 families. As part of our strategy also, it has allowed us to apply for funding from organizations that would not necessarily fund projects in Guatemala, but they were impressed by our planning and our immediate response. So design matters, and they've joined our efforts because they've seen the impact that we've had. And we've also had some recognition from different organizations, for example, the UNDP, and we've been working in Guatemala with the National Coordinator for the Reduction of Disasters, who have been supporting each of our deliveries. And we're also made an alliance with the Cultural Center of Spain in Guatemala, and they will be helping us building capacity for the organizations in our network and also or other organizations who are not part of RESI. And our fourth learning is that impact goes beyond what meets the eye. For us, yes, qualitative data is important, but for us, it's been more about the little things. With our first 4 deliveries, we've been able to reach more than 2,000 people each month. And as you can see, we struggled on our first delivery, which was in June, we struggled to find ways to support the 500 families that we initially agreed. And then we've had to deliver by parts, but we've been getting support and we've been finding ways to make this happen. And on our first delivery, which happened in September, we were able to give our first batch of veggies. And we've also set an emergency fund for positive cases of COVID-19, working with a health center in the city, and also our own emergency fund to support families that would contact us via social media to request for help. This month, we delivered to 200 more families, so we increased the support. And we still have 2 more months to go to find ways to keep supporting these families. So we're welcoming any help that we can, because we're going to keep the support for the 500 families and additional 200 families. In total, we've delivered more than 3,000 food baskets. There's been more than 800,000 meals served and 4,000 people supported. And for us, working with women is working with the community. And also our impact goes not just to the families that we're helping, also we've been strengthening the organizations, and even as volunteers, we've been growing our skills. And we've also been supporting and working with organizations in the public sector and appealing to the empathy and collective care of individuals to make a change. And this is just some of the quotes of the family, how they say that they've been treated kindly and how they've said that the food baskets last them for quite a few days. And I have another guest today.
Hi, Service Lab London. Here is a little demonstration of the work we are doing in Resi here in Guatemala. Today is one of our most important days in the month. We are delivering food baskets and vegetables to 700 families. As you can see, they come in, they sign, and they will after that receive the crops. The crops were harvested yesterday, and we have all the food here in our storage. Volunteers will be here for around 7 hours to deliver the food for all the families.
And our last learning is that the end is just as important as the beginning. We're planning our exit strategy so that what we've accomplished with the families can be sustainable. So closing for us involves strengthening the capabilities of our partner organizations, which will be trained in January. And we'll also open this training for other organizations, and we'll hand over the data that we've captured, and we'll just be consolidating the network. And just to say goodbye.
We are so thankful for your support, and in any way, please continue to believe and hope in humanity.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And if people want to know more about the project or want to get in touch with you, what's the best way of contacting you?
Yeah, it could be either on Instagram at TreyGH, or if they want to donate to the project, resi.gt, and then it'll take them to our number.
Brilliant. Awesome. Okay, thanks a lot.
Next speaker up tonight is Rachael. Rachael works at Action for Children, and she's responsible for developing and delivering user-led sustainable digital services that meets the needs, wants, and behaviors of parents across the UK. She leads and works with multidisciplinary teams and the most important partners, parents. Tonight, she's going to talk about scaling a digital service at Action for Children. I'm going to hand over to you, Rachael. Should be able to share your screen.
So as Ottila said, I'm Rachael. I'm the Digital Services Lead for Parenting at Action for Children. And one of my main responsibilities is leading the design, development and scaling of Parent Talk, which you'll be hearing all about today. Got a bit of a case study, I think, for you. I'll be talking about how and why we scaled so dramatically during the pandemic, but we'll start off by giving you a bit of context about the service so that hopefully it makes a bit of sense to you. So Action for Children is a large organisation. We support over 360,000 children and families across the UK. We're primarily a service delivery charity supporting children, young people and families. We also do campaigning and fundraising, but primarily service delivery. And over 80% of our 4,500 strong workforce are face-to-face delivery. So you can imagine what lockdown and what the pandemic meant for our organisation. Across Action for Children, we temporarily pivoted towards remote service delivery, which in my opinion is quite different to digital service delivery, and I will touch on that again later. But because of that, it meant that 99% of our services were able to continue supporting children, young people and families who are some of the most vulnerable people in the UK, and they were already struggling. We've heard a lot in the news and sort of all these sort of events we're attending that we've been in a crisis, but actually for a lot of our service users, they were already in a crisis, they're already struggling, and they've basically been hit by an avalanche when coronavirus hit. It's hit them really hard and it's just pushed them further into crisis. So one of the things that Action for Children did was we launched an emergency appeal very quickly. From my knowledge, it's one of the first times Action for Children has been able to do an emergency appeal. And as a result of that, we supported 10,000 children and families to sort of get through the pandemic, I guess. 40% of those 10,000 families were struggling to feed their children. Food poverty is, I think, a big thing at the moment, and quite rightly, lots of families are affected by it. But other things that they're facing, as well as just the food poverty, is financial pressures and just the toll on mental health. So on Parent Talk, which is the service I'll talk about mostly, every single parent that's coming through on the one-to-one chat at the moment is high need without exception. You'll hear a bit more about this shortly, but we're primarily an early intervention service, but that's kind of changed during the pandemic. And some of the big needs at the moment are around managing to co-parent during lockdown, local lockdowns, the ever-changing situation, the whole school refusal, and the mental health are just a couple of the examples. So I haven't got any videos, and I thought it'd be a bit too clunky if I tried to demo the site, so I've got a few screenshots for you. So Parent Talk is an online service for parents of 0 to 19-year-olds, providing information, advice and guidance in the form of articles written by our expert family support workers, and also providing live chat via one-to-one live chat. In terms of reach, it's probably Action for Children's largest digital service. We are working on several others, but in terms of reach, it's the largest. The information, advice and guidance articles can be self-served by parents 24/7. It's available on the internet. They can access it whenever they want. And the content is identified, that the articles that we write is identified through research with parents directly, the themes and needs and the kind of questions that are being asked on our one-to-one chats, and we also do daily social listening. So we're trying to do a lot more reactive information, advice and guidance content, especially at the moment. So on here you can see at the homepage, there is a link to the site at the end if any of you would like to take a bit of a nose or are parents and would like to access some support. If you then click on one of the subject areas, here's an example of the coronavirus specific content. So there's lots of articles, and you can filter by, I guess, topic within that, and also the age of your child, because the advice given sometimes, depending on the categories, does differ by age. Here's a screenshot of the landing page for the live chat. So we try to keep content to a minimum. Lots of testing has gone into designing this, and then you can click through and have a chat. So that is a very brief whistle-stop tour of Parent Talk, but I do suggest that you have a look if you're interested. In terms of Parent Talk today, we have supported over 330,000 parents since 2018, and we've had 8,000 one-to-one live chats. 83% of parents said that they found the content on the website useful, so that's the articles, and 78% of parents said that they feel supported after reading those articles. 90% of parents who use the one-to-one online chat rated the service as 4 or 5 out of 5. So we're pretty proud of the impact that we're having with parents. And here I've done that thing, I've put wordy slides on, but these are just a couple of the examples of the feedback that we get. But generally, feedback is that the service has really helped in their time of desperate need. They've had their feelings validated. They're appreciative of the combination of practical advice, emotional support and reassurance. And it's given them a confidence boost to take that action and do the interventions that they've been coached through. But also they're immensely grateful because they felt they had nowhere else to turn at that point when they turned to the internet and looked for advice. In terms of how we got here, we've been user-led from the start. In 2017, we ran 2 projects looking at how we could support parents in the early years space. And then from this, we developed 2 sites or microsites called Dots and Talk. We piloted both as separate projects, but shared the learnings. We worked very closely together. Dots was essentially information, advice and guidance for parents of 0 to 5. It consisted of trusted, legitimate advice and signposting to reputable sources. Talk was designed as an early intervention service for families who don't have or don't want to access face-to-face universal family support services, which means that they therefore don't have access to a support worker on a regular basis to just check in and see how they're doing, which when we were doing our research meant that that relationship that they have means that issues are identified. So by not having that, they don't get identified, they escalate or remain hidden. So Talk, which is a live chat service, was piloted in 3 areas of the UK. We did rural, city, we did north, south. We sort of tried to tick as many things off the checklist to check that it worked. And then we constantly gathered feedback and iterated, and we went through various rounds of what the service looks like and how it functions and the operations of it. Then we scaled it to nationwide, and we managed to control the reach of that by adjusting the Google ads. So it's pretty much in our control how busy we are. And then having secured national funding, so probably fast forward about a year, so we're probably at the end of 2018 now, we started looking at other needs that parents are facing, and we developed, this was in 2018 and 2019, 2 further information, advice and guidance sites. So one for parents who are worried about their teenagers' mental well-being, and then one for parents who are experiencing conflict, whether or not they're aware or unaware of that. We were very much piecing together a puzzle. Trying to solve the needs of parents is a huge undertaking, and we know that that is by no means easy to do. So we're sort of putting things together where we had funding, basically. Alongside that, we were doing research, which meant we sort of developed a plan, which you can see at the bottom of the slide. It's a very snazzy PowerPoint slide, actually. We're really high tech. But basically, this led to us planning to integrate into one service, creating a better experience for parents, more accessible, coherent messaging, and also increase the brand awareness. So the idea was that we would be able to cover more of a spectrum of needs for parents. And we had planned to do this for the second half of this financial year, so we would probably be in the early stages of that right now. Enter coronavirus. So as we all know, we hit lockdown and face-to-face services of all kinds dropped off a cliff. And we started seeing that demand for the live chat service and the service in general soared. Parents had no choice with little to no face-to-face support. So we reacted quickly. Over a weekend in April, we spun up a landing page, which you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, which basically better signposted to all the individual microsites that we had. If parents were looking, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for them to access the right information and kind of funnel them rather than trying to scattergun send them to lots of different places. Next, we were working alongside doing that. We worked on our sort of one-stop parent service, which is that PowerPoint slide I showed you on the previous slide. We carried out research and testing with families, and that included speaking to families in Italy to understand what the needs of parents in the UK might look like in a month's time. Because we kept hearing Italy were a few weeks ahead of us, we thought, okay, there's something there. We'll speak to those parents and get an understanding about how we can try and get ahead of the curve of the needs in the UK. Alongside the platform itself, which we are very much calling our MVP. It's not the finished product. I don't think anything in digital service design is, but it's very much an MVP. We worked on scaling the live one-to-one chat service delivery. So we went from having 3 members of staff delivering the service to 32. We used staff from existing services across the organisation who were temporarily unable to deliver face-to-face services. So they already had the knowledge to support families. They just were trained on how to use the service and with safeguarding processes and all that sort of stuff. We also worked with 5 local authorities to provide a local premium version of the service. So Parent Talk is available nationally, but we've sort of had a bespoke option for those local authorities. And this was another pilot in itself. We launched our MVP site in June, which is the middle shot that you can see, about 9 months ahead of schedule, which included a media launch, and it was basically 4 months worth of work done in 2 months. So the whole team were exhausted, but safe to say they're all very proud of themselves because it's a fantastic effort. The media launch consisted of press, TV coverage. You can see there that the team were featured on This Morning as part of a back to school project phone-in for 2.5 hours in August. So this image of the skateboard will probably be familiar to lots of you, and it's very much what we as service designers strive to do and sort of follow. But the reality is sometimes a bit hard. But I like to think that we followed it as accurately as we can with Parent Talk. I'd say we're somewhere around the scooter bike mark at the moment. There was a day in August during our media campaign, that This Morning day, when we had as many one-to-one conversations in one day as we did in the first 5 months of the pilot 3 years ago. And when we realised that, we all needed to take a quick sit down. For me, this summarises how we started small and scaled over time when we were ready with a gentle shock from coronavirus and had learned enough about our users and their needs, wants and behaviours in order for us to scale properly. It's taken us over 3 years to get to this point. We're still running the live chat off our pilot software, which IT are constantly on my back about, although we are kickstarting a project this month to upgrade that. A lot of our recording and reporting is incredibly manual. Again, it was designed for a very small scale pilot. It has been tweaked as we've progressed through the last 3 years, but we've not done a significant overhaul. So that's what that project will also be looking at. It's a necessary evil. We've had to prove that the service is worth the investment and has an impact before the organisation just start throwing money and resource at it. We know that there's a lot more that we need to do. We need to improve our evaluation and impact assessment, so be able to get impact longer term or measure the impact longer term. We need to diversify our user reach, user research to be representative of all parents or more parents across the UK. The service itself actually does manage to reach a whole range of parents and carers, so single parents, grandparents, the seldom heard, unemployed, LGBT, but the research that we have done to date has predominantly been with who we can get access to. Obviously, we've tried to be inclusive, but the service is ultimately being designed around a relatively small set of needs, wants and behaviours. So to ensure that the service works for everyone and aligns with all those individual expectations and behaviours, we need to do more to diversify our user research and testing. So I'm not sure what I'm doing time-wise, possibly a bit ahead, but just wanted to wrap up with a few pandemic learnings for normal life, if you can call it normal life, I guess the future. So during the pandemic, I think I touched on this earlier, I think there's a difference between digital services and remote service delivery. We and most organisations pivoted to delivering many of our services remotely. We simply lifted face-to-face services and delivered them via Teams or WhatsApp or whatever was available best we could to be able to continue providing service to children, young people and families. Our digital services, such as Parent Talk, are always meant to be delivered digitally, and they've been designed accordingly. We've considered the needs and wants of the parents and how they behave online. So I think it's important to distinguish between the two, so that when we reflect back on this time and the growth of digital, some organisations who maybe haven't seen much success with the remote service delivery don't discard digital services as a thing. It's actually that if you literally lift something and put it on Teams, it's not necessarily going to be the right thing, and that's okay. We're doing the best as we can. So I think, and for me, an important differentiation to make. In terms of sustainability, I think it's never too early to explore your options. Don't wait until you think your product is ready. If the MVP is meeting needs of some sort, then sell it already. Get that funding, get someone to sponsor it, get someone to buy into it. For example, we've always had this local premium version of the service in our pockets. We've always wanted to consider that as a sustainable model, but we've never actually put a lot of effort into it because we thought, oh, we need to get the product a bit ready. We need to get our reporting better. But actually the pandemic made us take the plunge and it landed. We didn't get the offer right. I'm not going to sit here and say that we nailed it in the first go. That would be unrealistic. But we made a difference to those local areas. And we've learned what this option and what this funding model looks like longer term. So yeah, definitely a pilot, and we think are successful with lots of learning. In terms of licenses, don't sign up for big expensive licenses that are going to tie you in for years. Hasty decisions to get your solution live could cost you more with the inability to be flexible and adapt. Like I said, we're still running off our pilot software, and we're paying a monthly a rate for that rather than sort of locking ourselves into a year. But we'd always planned to do this project, so we don't want to get tied in. And I think that's important to consider, especially at the moment where we're all reacting and pivoting so quickly. In terms of collaboration, you need a team of experts for successful service delivery. We all know that. I am by in no stretch of the imagination a children's services expert, barely a service design expert. But over the last 3 years, we've worked really closely with children's services, policy, fundraising, brand, media, insight and analysis. And we've already had those relationships, which was fantastic. But then whilst we've been scaling during the pandemic, everyone's expertise, they've just brought that little bit more, and it's been integral to the success of both the MVP development, the media launch, and how we're now continuing to make a difference, especially with policy and in the media. Evaluate and measure impact from the get-go. I've alluded to it a few times. Our reporting isn't the best at the moment, but we are able to demonstrate impact and get feedback. But to be able to do that, if you haven't got anything to compare from when you started, benchmarking is going to be impossible. So when you're looking at those funders, looking at those options, trying to get buy-in from the rest of the organisation, any kind of insight and impact evaluation you have will be really important. In terms of safeguarding, especially with digital service design, I guess, that needs to scale with you. So pre-pandemic, like I said, we had 3 staff members delivering the service. We had a really robust safeguarding process, which was regularly audited and praised, and they even wanted to replicate some of that in non-parent talk situations, which we're very proud of. But we were always wary and a bit scared of what would happen if and when we scaled. It was working how it was. How can we maintain that? Because safeguarding is key. And then we scaled dramatically from 3 to 32 staff members. And alongside that, the staff are based across the UK, supporting parents with really high levels of needs. To give an indication, in September, 18% of our one-to-ones were either safeguarding or had safeguarding concerns identified, compared to March, where it was 11%. And we basically prioritised safeguarding. We identified a safeguarding lead from one of those 3 staff members who we took off the daily conversations, so that they could keep on top of the recording, the referrals, the follow-ups, ensuring that we were like bang on the safeguarding process. And then, so next is the speed of change that has happened has been a big learning curve for me. So decisions that would have previously taken months were suddenly made overnight. To me, this suggests that the willingness for change and transition wasn't there, or maybe it wasn't prioritised for that person. And I think that's because they weren't bought into it. So those change makers who had previously slowed you down, or slowed me down, perhaps weren't as invested in the services as I needed them to be. So I think that's been a sort of reality check for me. And then finally, is don't underestimate the value of a healthy working environment. We've seen a lot of this about people working remotely, spending their whole time on screens. But that team of 32 staff, 29 of them had never met face-to-face. They're delivering a really, really hard service to families across the UK. They're seeing tough things day in, day out without having that staff room break, without being able to step away from their computer guilt-free because it's constantly pinging. When they're doing face-to-face work, they have a half-hour gap whilst they're driving from one family to another. They don't get that on this service. So we have prioritised their health and well-being. So we're enforcing breaks. The team environment that those guys have created is phenomenal, and I think that has been crucial to getting those conversations. And that's timely, that's me.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, that was really, really great. It was so interesting to learn more about the learnings that you've kind of taken away, and a lot of them kind of resonated for me. And I think for some of us here working on services like in charities and government, I think especially like starting small, these are like so basic, but it's really, really key to sort of remember that. So yeah, thanks for that.
I think also your last slides with the summary was great. Like you kind of answered all the questions that I was thinking while you were presenting. It was a great summary. We have other 2 speakers coming up next. We have Mieka and Sarah from British Red Cross. I can tell you a little bit about them. Mieka found her passion in user research back in 2019 and is now a product owner at the British Red Cross, passionate about developing user-focused products in line with business requirement. Before this, she worked in strategy development and performance management. Sarah is a service designer at the British Red Cross, and in a previous life was a psychologist in the NHS, and she loves user research and designing services that help people. Tonight, they will talk about local knowledge and national action. We'll share about co-designing and support services for local organizations. So over to you, Mieka and Sarah.
Thanks so much to everyone attending. So Mieka and I are going to be talking a little bit about the local knowledge and national action. So looking at the voluntary service and community emergencies partnership. So I will do a little bit of an intro, and then Mieka will walk through some of the user research that we did together. And then I will give a brief introduction to the service, and then looking at some of the other products that were created to meet some of the user needs. And we'll be sharing learnings along the way. So you'll get an insight into how we did things and some things that we wouldn't do again. So the Voluntary and Community Sector Emergencies Partnership is collaboration across a number of voluntary and community organisations. So British Red Cross is one of them. I'm a service designer at the British Red Cross. Mieka is also a user researcher, now product manager for the community sector emergencies products. And we both stood onto this project at British Red Cross, but we were asked to work on this project. I was on for 4 months and Mieka's on it currently still. The Voluntary Community Sector Emergencies Partnership, which I'll call the Emergencies Partnership for brief, was formed in 2017 following Grenfell Tower, and it rapidly provided a number of services during COVID. So for a couple of years, it was looking at strategic alignments with different organisations, but then moved on to producing a number of services, which we're going to show today. So the goals were threefold. So the first was to try and understand changing and unmet needs in an emergency. So trying to stay up to date with understanding what people needed locally. The second was to try and understand how we can coordinate and share sector-wide resources. So British Red Cross, a specialist in providing certain things, victim support in others, and how we could coordinate across charity sector to provide a coordinated and shared response with our resources. And the third was looking at how we can collaborate with local and grassroots organisations, as opposed to just having a top-down approach, thinking local up, and thinking what actually local organisations might need from us. So some of the things that we've done together today have been as follows. First has been who are a group of volunteers who collaborated to carry out COVID-19 tests. Another was looking at health assessments for people experiencing homelessness in a number of hostels across London. And then another was looking at supporting a food bank where we were able to transfer food from FareShare's Birmingham hub across to Leominster Food Bank, which had seen an enormous increase in demand. So these are just some of the examples of how lots of voluntary community sector partners work together to deliver things in partnership. So we're working across 5 regional groups. So you can see the map is showing 8 regions, but the way that we're working was using a group of people called multi-agency cells. I'm not going to use that word, we'll just call them groups. You can see Afsa laughing, she was also working on part of this project. But this was essentially all the different charity representations, so the British Red Cross, Victim Support, St John Ambulance, each working in different regions. So there was a North representation, Midlands and East, South East, South West and London. And they would all come together and as regional hubs say, oh, what's the priority for this week? What requests have we had in? Are there food banks that need our support? Do we need PPE? Do we need to organise volunteers, etc.? And that was all organised on a regional basis. So I'll hand the baton over to Mieka to give a bit of background of how we got to this point.
Yeah, so we started off quite early in a discovery to try and find out what the users' needs are. But our key question that we was trying to answer is, how do organisations collect and use information to respond to need? Apologies, I've turned off my camera because my reception is quite bad at the moment. I'll try and turn it on again. If I cut out, let me know and then I'll turn it off. So yeah, we started with the key question of how do organisations collect and use information around unmet needs, because our brief was to try and bring together information from across the sector to help with coordination, but also to help understand that unmet need. So I'm just going to take you through some of the lessons that we learned from some of the users that we spoke to. So the first one is that every organisation handles information differently. Like in March, especially when the pandemic hit and lockdown hit, there was loads of organisations mobilising to provide services, to collect information about people who need help. This was particularly difficult during lockdown, where you couldn't necessarily do a lot of door drop or go around to people's houses, and you weren't having the face-to-face engagement as much as we had pre-COVID. So everybody has their own way of defining who's in need and who's at risk. So we needed to factor that in to whatever service or products that we were about to develop, and making sure that we kind of had that shared understanding of how we was tracking need. There was definitely a need for coordination across the sector, because everybody was collecting information differently. Trying to share information across organisations was difficult. Trying to understand what was happening in any given area was very difficult. Early, for example, when we spoke to quite a lot of CEOs, there was this recognition that there was differences for how different local resilience forums were responding to crisis, and there was this real kind of desire to understand and support areas that were at greatest risk. So how can we work together to make sure that the people that need us and the organisations that need us most, how can we work together to make sure that they get the support that they need? And especially when speaking to mutual aid groups, it definitely rang true that local organisations respond first and respond better, and local people respond first and respond better. So when we were speaking to mutual aid groups, there was this kind of call to action really to make sure that whatever service or product that we was going to design didn't bypass existing systems and took account of the work that had already been taking place, that for example the mutual aid groups were doing. The next one was definitely that there was a lot more undynamic operational challenges and opportunities that arose throughout the pandemic. There was, for example, we had the food cycle volunteer. I'm not sure where people will be able to go for help because we are now shut. So there was a lot of food banks closing down. There was a lot of organisations at risk of closing down, and there was definitely a real concern about where these people would now go to get support in times of need. However, on the flip side of that, so the more positive thing that kind of arose from that earlier work was that there was definitely a sense that there was a lot more innovation across the sector and a lot more decisions being made rapidly to kind of bring about change. So there was definitely that kind of shared commitment that somebody spoke to earlier in their presentation. And then the final kind of key learning that we took out, there was definitely loads more, but the final key one that we wanted to highlight was existing relationships and trust. In times of emergencies, people default to what they know. They don't have time to spend ages looking for what support might be available online. They pick up the phone and call who they know. So there was this kind of real need and recognition that whilst that is the way people are used to working, for us, what we wanted to do is make sure that it was the people that need help the most that are getting support, and they're getting the right types of support. So if, for example, you just default to what you know, there might be a case of you're asking, you're requesting help from people that might not necessarily have the resources and capacity to be able to respond. A good example is the British Red Cross. We don't traditionally have a food service or a food support system, but we were getting quite a lot of requests for that, and that therefore there was that need for us to better coordinate with FareShare, for example, to make sure that even if the request was coming to us, the service and the support that was required was coming from the right people. So just to briefly summarise, I'm just going to minimise my Zoom. Just to quickly summarise, we spoke to a lot of people. We spoke to mutual aid groups, local resilience forums, charities, local organisations, community groups, etc., at varying levels in each of these different organisations. And broadly, we identified 4 core user groups. First, we have our local leads, and those are people that are really passionate about improving local relationships. They're well networked within their area and have a good understanding of the types of needs that are arising. There was definitely the element to understand, once we've gathered all of this information and all of that rich, detailed information that those local leads have, how do we get it from them to the right places, so that action and response can be taken, but also we can kind of have a shared and coordinated response plan in terms of calling for kind of systemic change where it might be needed. So the data analysts helped us and get information, like analyze information and get information to the right places. But we also learned from international response, where information managers are very highly valued because they have the right expertise to be able to manage that information flow through a process to get to the right places. Then we have the responders, which, as Sarah spoke to earlier, is largely for our groups, our 5 regional groups that are able to kind of collect information and understand what support is needed and broker that support to help the organisations that need it. And then the final one is the advocates, and that is, they really are focused on where is the need greatest, and their key role is where, for example, an operational response cannot be provided, what is the systemic change needed to be able to make sure that we can still meet the needs of people in crisis. So I'm just going to pause there and hand over to Sarah.
Thanks, Mieka. So Mieka's really nicely teed me up to present, like, so what's the gap, and like who was it that we were meant to be helping? And our conclusion from the discovery was actually local organisations. So looking at the people that were already on the ground, providing support, so that we weren't reinventing the wheel. So rather than the BCSCP creating a whole other service for individuals, we're looking at, well, let's try and support local networks that are already providing support. So how might we support local organisations get support when they need it? So when a local food bank is maxed out, or when a volunteer centre is really in need of extra volunteers. So the first thing that we worked on was a request service. I might get you to click next, Mieka. I'm not sure I've got. Awesome, thank you. And this was trying to help local organisations request support from local partners, regional partners, so from one of those 5 groups on the maps, or nationally. So if it was a massive challenge to get PPE in a number of local areas, then that would be raised and lobbied for nationally. So one of our big learnings, we've put them as remembers, was because we were involving lots of new members of staff very quickly, we actually didn't really pay enough time or attention, given that we're running at pace, to put in place onboarding. So I definitely think that was one of the biggest things to really consider, just like, what does onboarding look like for lots of new staff members into a service that have never worked together before. And we did it in our own haphazard way, but that was definitely one of the biggest takeaways for us from there. So the way that the service worked was people could request support through an online form, and then that request would go to one of the local leads. So there'd be 40 people across England, each dotted across one of those 5 areas. And they would be experts in understanding what the community resources have already. So the request might be, can I have 120 DBS checked, so that's police checked volunteers who are drivers, because we need help with drivers dropping off food parcels. So that local first person would be like, oh, I'm really well tapped into the local voluntary network, I'm sure we can sort that out locally. Or if that local lead was like, oh no, that's way too many, we've only got 16 local volunteers, then the next step would be going up to a regional group. So one of those 5 groups would review that request and say, hey, yeah, we can pull together, British Red Cross can offer some, Fair Share can offer some driver volunteers, and React can. So 3 voluntary groups would work together, get those drivers, and then get them out to the requester. And then if there was really a massive gap in that area around getting DBS check volunteers, it might go to a next level of national lobbying, where the Emergencies partnership would put it to government saying, look, we've got a national shortage of police check volunteers, we really need your support with this. So you can see all the different user groups that we're working with along the journey, and each of the bits that we had to consider. So it was the voluntary and community groups needs, plus local liaison needs, the people that we had to onboard into the service, plus regional groups with 100 members and counting, and onboarding those progressively through the weeks as people join the groups. and then the national group, and thinking about how do they want to receive information on need, what was useful for them to lobby. So every level of user group needed a different level of information. So over to Mieka. Oh no, is this me? Maybe it's you, Mieka.
I think this is still you, Sarah.
It's me. Great. So, so we wanted to share like 3 lessons learned from developing the service. So the very first was considering emotional well-being. So echoing the previous talk around like really thinking about how members of staff, and especially new members of staff to a service, are going to react. So the liaison leads, so the local people that were doing the triaging of the first requests, started getting really worried about the service and saying, look, we're going to start receiving loads of requests. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to handle these. And some said, I'm not going to promote the service locally because I don't have the capacity to do it. So other things that were put in place were like giving them a network. So they had a network on Teams, and they had WhatsApp groups where they could talk to each other and be like, oh, how are you doing? How are you finding the role? But we definitely could have done more earlier on to consider like how can we balance those new roles and people feeling at capacity. The second was around shared language. So lots of new roles and new entities were coming to being with this service, and some of it was like emergency response talk. So in the emergency response world, a broker is someone that arranges how support is got. So someone who arranges who's going to get volunteers or how those volunteers are going to get given. But in everyone else's land, a broker is someone that arranges a mortgage. So we created a service manual to try and break down some of those language silos and get people to understand a bit more about their role so they could talk about the service too, and promote it in their local areas to try and better understand it. And then finally, making the value obvious. There was a lot of anxiety around this not being a relevant service to local people, because they thought, well, actually, we're already doing this response locally. And we were really lucky to have a content designer on our team to really consider the language that we were using, but also as a result of having discussions with local leads, trying to understand, like, actually, we're trying to boost your local response, we're not trying to replace it. So being very careful around describing what support networks were already in place and how we fitted in. Over to Mieka.
Yes, it is over to me now. So I'm just going to really quickly take you through some of the other products that we developed as a result of the service. And this is just to show that although we designed the service to work with all of those different core user groups, each of the core user groups has very specific needs, and therefore we needed to develop something that kind of delivered for them, either overcoming some of their pain points or help them to get their jobs done. So for the local liaison leads, one thing that really came through from the user research when we were speaking to them was that they needed a way to champion their voice. Often the national campaigns drowned out their local voice, and they wanted a way to kind of escalate what they needed and their insight locally up to that national picture. I think the key thing to remember from this, what we done quite early on, and a big lesson learned, was we decided, okay, how can we get this information quite quickly, and developed quite a few surveys. So survey fatigue is definitely a thing, and it's something to kind of what we're learning from as we take forward into the other products. Second one, if my thing is working. The second one is a data lake and a data factory. Now, this is a place where one of our core motivations is to bring together data and insight from across the sector. So there's one central space where we've got information from British Red Cross, St. John's, victim support, etc., and loads of other charities from across the partnership. And this is a space for data analysts and data scientists to work together in a community, which we've got a data working group established for, to be able to do analysis for action and insight. The key thing for us to remember out of this is a factory is nothing without the fuel. So one thing that we've kind of taken away is It takes a lot to kind of foster a culture where people are willing to share data across organizations. There's a lot of kind of hesitation about doing that. So we initially assumed that people would be a lot more willing to share their data, and we haven't got as much data in the factory as we would like. The next is a web map that we've developed, and this is primarily to help with that intelligence gathering and to assist the multi-agent, so the regional groups, apologies, I keep on defaulting to terminology, to assist the regional groups to be able to reach out and look for what support is available in a particular area so they can drill down into a map. Here, I think the key learning for us is less is more. As you can see kind of from this list, there's quite a few different layers that you can add to a map, and this list continues and continues. It's quite extensive. So we need to do some work to really kind of focus on what are our users coming here for and what do they really need to take out. And then the final one, I'm sorry, I know I'm speaking fast. I think we've gone over our 15 minutes. The final one is that we've got data and data dashboards, and this is really designed for the advocates. So one thing that came out, for example, we've got a food subgroup that is a collection of quite a few different organizations, and for them they want data and insight that they can use across the organizations to really have that shared understanding of unmet need, but have that shared voice, because they believe that by having more of a shared voice, and if we're all using the same data and the same messaging, then we can bring about a bigger impact. Our key learning for this is at the moment it's kind of restricted behind passwords. You have to be granted access to access the dashboard, which isn't nice. There's reasons for that, but insight requires access, so you can't expect people to make data informed decisions if they can't see the data. So thank you. Sorry that we went over. I'm not sure how much we went over, but I'll pause here for any questions.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mieka and Sarah. I really kind of resonated with some of the lessons learned, especially around emotional well-being. Yeah, and I think some of us can sort of speak for that. We've got time we'll take just one question. So Essie June, she just asked, out of curiosity, what software did you use to map all the different support, for example, food banks?
That is a very good question. And Sarah, I'm not sure if you can help with that one. I didn't do it. It was our team of information managers, and we worked very closely with Map Action to be able to kind of bring that web map together. For the life of me, and it was spoken about today, I'm really sorry. I'll find it and I'll put it into the slide deck before we share it out. But for the life of me, I can't remember.
It's one of our geographical information specialists, but we can definitely link you up and he can tell you as well. Yeah.
Just to round off, if they want to get in touch with you, if they have any questions, whatever, what's the best way of contacting you?
We did have a slide on that. Apologies, I forgot to share. So my Twitter is @WeberMieka. Sarah's is @Sarah Bargiela. You can get in touch as well through @VCSEP. So we'll share it in the chat and we'll share it in the slide deck.
All right, so that kind of leads us to our final session, which I'm really excited. So we got Kate and Hannah. They both work at GDS. We've got Kate and Hannah here. Thanks for joining us. We're so glad that you're here with us. It would be, I know both of you, but what would be good is for everyone, I'm sure a lot of us know you as well, but it would be good if you could introduce us. Yeah, tell us a bit about yourself. What's your role at GDS at the moment, and perhaps what kind of projects have you been working on?
I'll go first. So I am Kate. I'm a service designer and I'm a design lead on gov.uk programme. Currently the design lead across the what gov.uk are calling critical priorities, which makes it sound less painful than calling it coronavirus and Brexit. So that's what I'm leading on at the moment. Previously to March, I was I've been at GDS for about 5 years, and so previous to being on all the Brexit and coronavirus stuff, I've been leading the work on how does gov.uk sort of as a platform deliver joined up services to users, and how do we as a programme deliver services back to government. So those are the sort of two hats that I approach my work with a current focus on the coronavirus and Brexit work.
And I'm Hannah. I'm a content designer on Gov.uk, and since March I've been working on various coronavirus things. So many different products that we've built to help people find coronavirus information or help. So one of them is a service called Find Support, where you can get help from government or other organisations and find out what you can do based on your situation. More recently, last week, I was working on the postcode lookup checker, which you might have seen, which tells you what local alert level you're in, and a few other things. So yeah, I'm a content designer, but focusing on like people's journeys through these things and helping them find what they need.
You are the coronavirus veterans on the call as well. I know Ignatia's here, who's worked with us on this stuff, and I know Simon was here earlier. I don't know if he's coming back, but just to say, it's not just me and Hannah doing this stuff. There's been a team of, many designers and many other people beyond designers. I think probably at least 50 people or more have been working on this stuff since March. So we'll take all the credit in this session, but yeah.
And Louise,
yeah, it's one of those things. It takes a whole team to actually deliver a service. It's never just like a few people. So yeah, it would be great. So it's like in your own sort of words, what would you say the challenges that you've kind of faced, like designing on those services?
Maybe I can talk a bit about the launch of the landing page and the sort of subsequent iterations of it. I think one big challenge in the very early days was that we knew we had to get information out there, but we're used to following the process of like discovery, alpha, beta, live, whereas this was a situation that was emerging at great pace, and we knew we had to get something live and aggregate all of the information that was already being published by lots of different departments on gov.uk. So we had to really make like a sort of best guess to get something out there, to get the sort of gov.uk coronavirus landing page out there, based on the information that we could gather at the time, like these really very emergent needs that we didn't have validated, but we validated them as much as possible in that we sort of saw people searching for stuff on gov.uk, and we sort of saw what was going on in Italy, and we have a couple of, we have a content designer and a user researcher who are Italian, so they conducted some research with Italians on the sort of needs that are emerging there. That's been a big challenge, is the pace at which things have evolved and the situation, and the sort of the policies that have sort of evolved as well, and how we've had to communicate those, particularly around the press communicating stuff at the same time, and people getting a lot of their information from the press, and then us sort of being sometimes on the back foot even, because the press will catch wind of something and report it before it's even necessarily confirmed. So iterating what we have online at that amount of sort of at that speed with the sort of just enough information, or sort of finding just enough information to feel confident that we're addressing the user needs that people have, that's been a huge challenge. Hannah, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think kind of linked to that, what you were saying about us kind of being on the back foot and getting information from the press and people getting information from the press and other places, is that, so you're always like, whenever you're designing something, you're designing it in the context of what's going on around it. But here, like, everyone is interested, most people are interested in coronavirus information, and most people are finding that out every day from various places. And often, so for example, with the postcode checker last week, we know that people are calling them tiers in the press, and then government is calling them local COVID alert levels. And actually, like, we know that it's confusing for people for things to be called hundreds of different things, but often we're finding that out after we've built something or at the same time, and there's little room to kind of influence that. And the same thing with the NHS app, like on that app, you put in the first half of your postcode and you get information, but our tool, you put in your full postcode and you get more specific information. But obviously not everyone knows that, so they're confused about why they're getting different information or different postcodes. So we're kind of then discovering these things as we go along, and then helping people to understand what we're doing in that context, but that can be really hard.
Yeah. So it would be so just based on that, it's just there's lots of questions coming to my mind. But you mentioned one of the things that you mentioned is like building at pace. If you could go back and do one thing different, what would it be?
I think something that we've learned is that building things that are where the policy is not owned by us. We are sort of facilitators a lot of the time of other departments, and we have produced things over the course of the last few months that are about policy that is not owned by GDS. It's Bay's policy around safer working, or it's the HSE policy around which workplaces can be open, for example, and we, because we're working at such pace, trying to do the right things that answer user needs, but I think producing things so quickly that we didn't necessarily set up the right governance around those things, where other departments needed to input and tell us when they needed to change. That's been really challenging, and that's something that, having governance around things that are jointly owned between us and departments is something I've been banging on about for ages on gov.uk, and it's something that I've been really trying to do, but I guess luckily this situation has shone a light on that, the fact that that's so important, that it becomes a real issue if we don't have departments engaged who are sort of like have named roles or named people within those departments who can work with us when things need updating, and we're not just having to find out about this last minute and work late into the night in order to update something because someone didn't tell us a day ago when things changed. And
I think as well as that, knowing, because we're having to build stuff quickly to meet needs that we know about at the time, also knowing that it's okay to take stuff down if it's not useful, because I think that's often quite scary when you're like, oh well, maybe a few people are finding it useful, so maybe we should keep it. But actually, if you can see that those needs are being met elsewhere and you've got data on it from a few months and you know that it's not doing what it was doing at the beginning, then being like, okay, that's fine, that worked, now we're gonna get rid of it and improve other stuff instead. And I think that's really important.
And that's definitely something that we've been doing in the last month or so, is saying, really going back onto sort of the projects, and we've done a series of smart answers, which are essentially ways for users to find specific specific answers to their questions, sort of extracted from complicated guidance, and they're really difficult to maintain, especially without the help of departments, and we've been going back and questioning, are these things still useful? Is the effort of maintaining them worth the value that they bring to users, or can we focus our efforts on something that is a more up-to-date need that could be addressed in relation to the current situation as it's evolved to now? And I think we've retired 2 smart answers at least, which is great, because now we can focus our efforts on other things, and there's always more things to do than we have time to do them, so it's good that we're doing that now.
Yeah, I think that's really that's quite valuable, in the sense that when we design something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it should be there forever, and there does come a time when we can actually, it is okay to sort of end that or just take it down, because maybe it's just the use of it's just for a very small period of time, but it is definitely needed. So and that is something that I kind of experienced when I was working in the COVID response for the Red Cross, where we were trying to build a support manual for our frontline staff in the regional cells, and there was a question but we're not going to need it for forever, so what's the point in building it? But then it's you still do need it, but even though if it's for a short period of time, and it is okay to design it for a short to have it up for a short period of time and then take it down. So nothing that's designed needs to be forever. So cool. My next question would be, it was around how has this sort of response that you've been involved in differs from other kind of work that you've been involved in, like, has there been any other cases that you would classify as an emergency, or what do you think about that term, using emergency? Is it something that is relevant, like in the gov sort of perspective?
I guess it's interesting because I'm working across the coronavirus and the Brexit space, and whilst Brexit is not an emergency yet, all of the work that's going on Brexit is to avoid emergency. So it's focused on urgency rather than emergency, because government really wants businesses to take action. And I'm sure people who are in the audience today will have seen some of the adverts that have now started on I've seen them on Channel 4 recently around the 1st of January, new rules. So that it's been interesting on Brexit because there's been a series of crunch points where government has kind of gotten much more frantic about trying to get people to take action and to sort of prepare actions to prepare their business for trading with the EU after Brexit and things like that. But it's quite different in nature, because the situation is not changing so reactively. It's more that there are a series of dates in the future that we know we are working towards, and those dates keep moving, which means that there are sort of several crunch points that seem to happen, but of which the end of December is going to be one. But it's quite different in nature. We're not so on our toes in terms of having to work out what do we need to be doing now, and like trying to kind of be really responsive. I guess one similarity is that we've done quite a lot of scenario planning, trying to think about what happens, like with the coronavirus stuff. It's what happens if over winter we have like a post-summer peak and then a winter peak, or what happens if it trails off, or what happens if we just have a really big winter peak. And we've been trying to plan a bit around that, what that means for our product. And in the same way with Brexit, we've got these different scenarios of what happens if there is a deal, what happens if there's a deal but with the conditions, what happens if there's no deal, and then trying to think about how our products need to respond in relation to that. That's been quite an interesting aspect, I think, of the sort of critical priorities work, is this scenario planning.
Yeah, and I think that in a way that's what makes them quite different, because with Brexit it's kind of an urgent thing, but it's happening in the future, and so also people aren't necessarily looking for it. So we're trying to kind of, I guess, make stuff obvious for people when they come to Gov UK to find it. But then with coronavirus, loads of people are coming to Gov UK to find it, and they're all looking for certain things. So in a way, one of them's kind of like a push and one of them's kind of like a pull. And I was working on some Brexit content last year where it was coming up to no deal, and it felt a bit like an emergency in terms of like, how do we put all this information for what people are going to need to do in that situation on Gov UK? And I think that was really hard, because it's like, well, we're trying to tell people what they need to do now and what they might need to do in the future. And that's quite confusing if you're like a business and you don't want to be doing any of this stuff. So like, how do we help them to navigate that?
And the especially fun thing that we're thinking about at the moment is what happens to people who are trying to do things that are impacted by both coronavirus and Brexit. Like if you're wanting to plan travel to Europe in January, that could be impacted by both of those things. So we're trying to look now at the sort of user needs that cut across both of those spaces of policy change, to consider sort of the user need holistically and help people plan with the sort of task-based planning, rather than, oh, I've got my coronavirus hat on, I'm going to go through the coronavirus landing page and think about travel, or I've got my Brexit hat on, I will go to the transition landing page and plan travel. So that's a really interesting challenge, but that's the sort of, because we know we've got this huge audience coming to gov.uk looking for coronavirus information, that there's a sort of push now for us to kind of cross-pollinate the Brexit stuff, but we're trying to do that in a way that is useful to people and isn't just like shoving transition stuff down their throats on completely irrelevant pages.
Yes, thanks for that. Can I go back to an earlier point that you were talking about scenario planning. Like, how would you go about doing that? Yeah, it would be good to know a bit more about that.
A bit, yeah. This is it's the policy and strategy leads have taken a bit of a lead on this. So because we get a bit of steer from like number 10 and the like the coronavirus team in Cabinet Office, and they've also been doing a bit of scenario planning. So with regards to the sort of like summer peak, winter peak, just winter peak, like that's something that's a bit of a framework that we've taken from them and built that out to say, well, what does this mean for the different products that we have? What does this, like, what are the gaps that this could highlight that we might need to think about filling? And so, yeah, I think that there's often like a bit of an understanding of what the different possible scenarios could be. And then we've just mapped them against the things in our sort of ecosystem of stuff to understand what that means in each scenario.
Oh, okay, interesting. That's good to know. I'm just going to ask one final question before I open the floor to everyone else to sort of ask questions. I'm sure they have lots of questions. Yeah, what advice would you give for a designer if they start working on in an emergency, or so let's say 5 years down the line there could be another pandemic or something else? What advice would both of you give to that designer who's about to start working there?
I guess one thing that I keep telling Hannah is done is better than perfect. And it's better that we get something out quickly and then sort of establish that we're going to iterate it. That's okay. So I think, you know, when things are moving so quickly, getting stuff out and not being too punishing of yourself, is because we want to do the best that we can, but we've only got so much time, and we also, you know, you're in a pandemic, you also have to look after yourself and your own mental health and not be thinking about work 24/7 and not sleeping. So done is better than perfect, and you know, we're doing the best that we can in the situation that we have, and we can always iterate. I think that's the advice I'm sort of giving to the team at the moment.
Yeah, and I think you kind of have to, I think it's often quite scary when you're designing such important stuff that you kind of feel like you're kind of like what you're designing could impact like the support that people get or how quickly they find that or what they do. So if you start thinking about it, you feel like you've got quite a lot of responsibility on your hands. But I also think, like Kate says, like you need to remember that if you're following your like good design principles and you're thinking about what people want and you have empathy, then you're gonna like just by putting something out there that's thought through, then you'll be doing the right thing. So yeah, I think that's really important, because otherwise you can overthink everything you've done, and then that's not great.
Thanks for that. That is some really sound, solid advice, especially done is better than perfect. Yeah, lots to take away from that. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. If people have any questions and they want to find out a bit more or have get some more advice, what's the best way of contacting both of you?
I'm on Twitter at KateIW.
Okay.
Yeah, and so my at Han_jump.
Awesome, brilliant. Thank you, Kate and Hannah. I really appreciate it. It's been fascinating talking to you today. You know what? I just think we could always have a lot more longer time just to talk a bit more about it. I'm sure we would learn lots more. But yeah, it's something to think about for next time for our team. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, just to wrap up, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you staying, especially after 7:30. But just to wrap up, if you've got any ideas or how we can improve, we welcome them. So you can feel free to DM us on Service Lab London on Twitter. And then last but not least, our next event is going to be the last event for this year. It's going to be a panel discussion, and we'll be having 4 speakers on discussing what's the future of service design look like. It's going to be an interesting one, especially given what we've been through this year. So it'll be interesting to see what people will say. It's going to be on Wednesday, the 18th of November. So yeah, and if you're keen of giving a talk, or you want to just try something new, yeah, do get in touch. We welcome everyone. We're really, really keen on empowering our communities, especially around public speaking. So yeah, that's it from me. Yeah, and I guess, yeah, last but not least, just say stay safe, and we'll see you next month. Thanks a lot, everyone.